What if I told you some of the most powerful people in tech are people you've never heard of? Not celebrities or influencers, and not even public billionaires like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg. Just individuals quietly building empires worth hundreds of millions, and sometimes billions completely under the radar. No interviews, no headlines, no spotlight. So who are they, and why stay invisible? In this video, we uncover 7 extremely rich black tech founders who move in silence and redefine what real power looks like. We're starting with number 7, Tope Awotona. This is someone who built his fortune in one of the most competitive industries on Earth. At first glance, nothing about Tope Awotona screams billionaire founder. No flashy interviews, no loud personal branding, no constant presence in tech media. And yet, he quietly built Calendly, a tool that millions of professionals rely on every single day. What started as a simple idea eliminating the back and forth of scheduling meetings turned into a global platform used by businesses, entrepreneurs, and corporations worldwide. But here's where his story becomes different, because unlike most Silicon Valley founders, Awotona didn't start with massive venture capital backing. He started with his own money. He invested his personal savings into building the product, taking on a level of risk most founders try to avoid. And that decision reveals something deeper. A pattern you'll notice across many black tech founders. Instead of chasing investors early, they prioritize ownership and control. Because ownership changes everything. It determines who makes the decisions, who controls the future, and ultimately who keeps the wealth. Today, Calendly has reached a valuation of over $3 billion. But the real story isn't just the number, it's how it was built. While Silicon Valley's startups often burn millions chasing growth, Awotona focused on profitability early. He built a system that generated revenue before scaling aggressively. This is one of the key differences in strategy. Black founders often build companies that are financially stable first, scalable second. And that approach creates something far more powerful than hype. It creates leverage, which raises a bigger question. If you can build billions without attention, why chase attention at all? But if Awotona mastered quiet execution, the next founder mastered something even more powerful: controlling the companies that control the industry. Number 6, Robert F. Smith. When people think about billion-dollar tech empires, they usually imagine fast-moving startups, viral apps, and founders constantly in the public eye. But Robert F. Smith represents a completely different kind of power in tech. Through Vista Equity Partners, he built one of the most influential private equity firms in the software industry, quietly accumulating control over a massive portfolio of enterprise software companies worth tens of billions of dollars in combined value. Unlike Silicon Valley venture capital firms that invest early in risky startups with uncertain outcomes, Vista Equity Partners operates on a very different philosophy. Instead of betting on potential, Smith focuses on acquiring established software companies that are already generating stable revenue and then scaling them through operational transformation. This means the companies he invests in are not experiments. They are already functioning businesses with real customers, real cash flow, and real market presence. The strategy is not about discovering the next big thing. It is about optimizing what already works and turning efficiency into exponential value. And this is where his model becomes especially important. Because while Silicon Valley celebrates speed, hype, and rapid scaling, Smith's approach is built on structure, discipline, and long-term control. Once Vista acquires a company, the focus shifts immediately to systemization. Processes are standardized, software performance is optimized, and inefficiencies are removed at every operational level. Over time, this creates a compounding effect where profitability increases, not through speculation, but through engineering discipline applied at scale. This is one of the key differences in investment strategy between traditional Silicon Valley VCs and founders like Robert F. Smith, where venture capital often prioritizes growth at all costs. Vista prioritizes sustainable profitability. Where VCs chase valuation spikes driven by market hype, Smith focuses on long-term enterprise value built through operational control. And that difference fundamentally changes how wealth is created. Because instead of depending on unpredictable startup success stories, Vista Equity Partners builds value through ownership of already proven systems. Another critical aspect of this model is its invisibility. Private equity does not operate in the public spotlight the way consumer tech companies do. There are no viral product launches, no mass user announcements, and no need for public branding campaigns. Most of the work happens behind closed doors through acquisitions, restructuring, and long-term portfolio management. This naturally creates a low-visibility environment where enormous financial influence exists without mainstream recognition. And that connects directly to one of the central ideas of why many Black tech founders choose to stay hidden. In Smith's case, visibility is not part of the strategy because it is not required for success. His influence comes from ownership and control of software ecosystems, not from public-facing branding or media attention. And when you operate at that level, recognition becomes secondary to results. Because the real power is not in being seen, it is in owning the systems that others depend on. Smith represents a model where success is measured not by fame, but by the depth of control over enterprise software infrastructure. And that is why Vista Equity Partners remains one of the most powerful, yet least publicly discussed forces in the tech industry. Number 5. David Steward. This might be one of the most shocking stories on this list. Because while most people are focused on flashy Silicon Valley startups, viral apps, and founders constantly chasing media attention, David Steward was building something completely different in the background. Through worldwide technology, he quietly created one of the largest privately held tech companies in the United States, generating over $20 billion in annual revenue. But what makes this even more surprising is that most people outside the business and enterprise tech world have never even heard of the company. And that detail alone reveals everything about how his empire was built. Instead of creating a consumer-facing brand designed to go viral or dominate social media conversations, Steward focused entirely on enterprise infrastructure. His company operates in the background of global technology systems, working with large corporations, government agencies, and multinational enterprises to build and maintain the digital backbone that keeps modern businesses running. So, while the average person interacts with visible tech platforms like apps, streaming services, and social networks, worldwide technology is operating behind the scenes, making sure the deeper systems that power those platforms function without failure. Many Black tech founders do not build in spaces where visibility is required for success. They build in industries where performance, reliability, and trust matter far more than public recognition. Because in enterprise technology, your customers are not millions of everyday users. Your customers are institutions that depend on stability over hype, execution over marketing, and long-term value over short-term attention. Now, what makes Steward's strategy even more powerful is the way he scaled the company. Unlike Silicon Valley startups that grow through hype cycles, aggressive fundraising rounds, and constant media exposure, his approach was built on long-term enterprise contracts and relationship-driven expansion. He didn't chase users. He chased trust. He didn't burn capital trying to dominate headlines. He built systems that delivered consistent value over time. And instead of relying on visibility to attract opportunities, he relied on repeat business, infrastructure dependency, and deep institutional partnerships. This creates a completely different kind of growth model from what most people are used to seeing in tech. Silicon Valley scaling often prioritizes speed, rapid expansion, and public valuation milestones, where companies are pushed to grow as fast as possible in order to attract more funding and media attention. But Steward's model prioritizes stability, controlled expansion, and operational precision, where growth is slower but far more durable. And that difference leads to something very important: predictability in an industry that is usually defined by volatility. Another reason worldwide technology remains relatively unknown in mainstream conversations is because of the environment it operates in. Enterprise technology companies do not depend on public popularity. They depend on long-term contracts, multi-year agreements, and deep integration into corporate systems. Once a company like WWT becomes part of that infrastructure, its value is no longer measured by attention, but by necessity. That means the more successful the company becomes, the less visible it actually needs to be. And this is where David Steward's story ties directly back into the bigger question behind this video. Why do so many black tech founders choose to stay hidden? Because in models like his, visibility is not required for success. In some cases, it can even be a distraction. When your business depends on enterprise trust, system reliability, and long-term operational execution, your reputation inside the industry matters far more than your public image. So while Silicon Valley often celebrates founders who dominate headlines and build personal brands alongside their companies, Steward represents an entirely different philosophy. One where success is measured not by how many people know your name, but by how deeply your systems are embedded in the global economy. But not all power comes from building companies. Sometimes, it comes from deciding who gets funded next. Number 4. Arlan Hamilton. Before the venture capital world ever took her seriously, Arlan Hamilton was completely locked out of it. No elite university connections, no wealthy network, no access to the rooms where billion-dollar decisions were being made. In fact, there was a time she didn't even have a place to live, sleeping in airports, living off uncertainty, watching an industry from the outside that she knew she belonged in. But here's what makes her story different. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait to be invited. Instead, she made a decision that would completely change the game. If she couldn't get access to venture capital, she would build her own. That decision led to the creation of Backstage Capital, a firm focused on investing in founders that traditional Silicon Valley investors consistently overlooked. Women, people of color, LGBTQ founders. The ones with ideas but no access. And this is where her story connects directly to a bigger pattern you've seen throughout this video. Because just like Tope Awotona chose to bootstrap instead of relying heavily on venture capital, and just like Robert F. Smith built an $8 billion private equity machine through precision instead of hype, Arlan Hamilton approached the system differently. Not by playing the game, but by rewriting the rules entirely. And here's where things get even more powerful. While many venture capital firms focus on founders who already look investable, Hamilton focused on those who were undervalued. Because she understood something most investors didn't, opportunity is often hidden in plain sight. And that insight became her advantage. Through Backstage Capital, she has invested in hundreds of startups, quietly influencing the future of tech from behind the scenes. No constant media noise, no obsession with headlines, just strategic bets on people others ignored. And this brings us to one of the most important talking points in this entire video: the difference in investment and scaling strategies. While traditional Silicon Valley VCs often chase trends, pump money into companies, and hope for explosive growth, Hamilton's approach is far more intentional. She looks for resilience, adaptability, untapped potential. Because when you invest in underestimated founders, you're not just betting on a product, you're betting on perspective. And perspective is what creates disruption. But here's the part most people don't fully understand. Her story isn't just about building a venture capital firm. It's about changing access to wealth itself. Because venture capital doesn't just fund companies, it determines who gets the chance to build the future. And by shifting who gets funded, Hamilton is quietly reshaping the entire ecosystem. Now think about that for a second. While some founders chase visibility, she's building influence at the source. And that brings us back to a bigger question. Why do so many black tech founders choose to stay hidden? Because when you've had to fight for access, you learn quickly that visibility isn't always power. Sometimes power is in the room where decisions are made. Sometimes power is deciding who gets funded. And sometimes power is building something so impactful that it speaks for itself. Just like David Steward built a $20 billion revenue company without constant media attention, and just like Robert F. Smith controls billions through software investments, Arlan Hamilton is doing something just as powerful. She's shaping the next generation of hidden empires. Quietly, strategically, and on her own terms. Now let's go deeper into someone whose influence exists at the foundation of modern computing. Number 3. Mark Dean. You've probably used a computer today. But what if I told you one of the key people behind modern computing is someone most people have never heard of? Mark Dean, a quiet genius who helped shape the personal computer revolution at IBM. We're talking about the kind of innovation that doesn't trend on social media because it predates the culture of tech celebrity entirely. But here's where this becomes even more important. Mark Dean represents a different type of power in tech. Not startup power, not venture capital power, but foundational power. The kind of power that exists beneath everything else, and this ties directly into one of the core ideas in this entire video. Not all wealth in tech comes from visibility. Some of it comes from infrastructure, and infrastructure doesn't need attention. It only needs to function. Now, to understand the scale of his impact, you have to zoom out for a moment. Modern computing, laptops, desktops, servers, and cloud systems all depend on layered architecture. And engineers like Mark Dean were involved in building those early frameworks that allowed systems to become faster, more scalable, and more efficient. That's not just a technical contribution, that's ecosystem design. And this is where his story connects to a larger pattern among Black tech innovators. Many of them operate in roles where their impact is massive, but invisible to the public eye. Why? Because the tech world has historically celebrated the product layer, not the foundation layer. Users see apps, investors see companies, but very few people see the engineers and architects who made those systems possible in the first place. And that invisibility creates something important: a different relationship with fame. Mark Dean didn't build his career around public recognition. He built it around technical excellence and system-level thinking. And that distinction matters, because while Silicon Valley often rewards those who can communicate ideas loudly, engineers like Dean represent the opposite: quiet execution at the deepest level of innovation. Now here's where it ties back into the key talking point of stealth versus publicity in Black tech founders. Many of the most influential Black contributors in tech didn't grow within a system that encouraged visibility from the start. Instead, they worked in environments where success was measured by output, not attention. So naturally, their success model became different. Build the system, improve the structure, solve the problem. Move on to the next challenge. No need for constant self-promotion, because in environments like that, your work speaks for you. And that mindset carries into modern Black tech founders as well. Even today, you see echoes of this approach in founders like Tope Awotona and Robert F. Smith, where the focus is not on loud branding, but on control, systems, and scalability. Unlike Silicon Valley's highly visible startup ecosystem, where fundraising rounds, valuations, and media coverage often define success, the IBM-style engineering mindset is different. It focuses on stability over hype, efficiency over exposure, and long-term functionality over short-term visibility. And that philosophy quietly influences how many Black tech leaders approach wealth building today. And that's exactly the kind of legacy Mark Dean represents. Not loud, not viral, but foundational. And in many ways, that might be the most powerful form of influence in the entire tech industry. Now, here's where things get even more interesting, because the next founder didn't just build a company, he built an entire network across continents. Number 2, Strive, Masiyiwa. Before the world became obsessed with startups and Silicon Valley valuations, Strive Masiyiwa was fighting a completely different kind of battle. Not for funding, not for attention, but for the right to even operate. Because in the early days of building Econet Wireless, Masiyiwa wasn't just trying to grow a business. He was challenging a system that controlled access to telecommunications. At the time, the industry was dominated by government monopolies, making it nearly impossible for private companies to enter. But instead of stepping back, he pushed forward, taking on legal battles that lasted years. And when he finally broke through, he didn't just build a company. He built access. Through Econet Wireless, he created a telecom network that connected millions of people across Africa, laying the groundwork for digital communication in regions where infrastructure was still developing. And that is what makes his strategy so different. While many tech founders build on top of existing systems, Masiyiwa built the system itself. He wasn't scaling within a market. He was helping create the market. And that changes everything. Because when you control infrastructure, you don't just participate in growth, you enable it. Many Black founders operate in spaces where long-term structural impact matters more than short-term visibility. Their focus is not on trends, but on systems that last. Masiyiwa expanded Econet Wireless beyond a single country, turning it into a multinational operation across Africa and other regions. And unlike the typical Silicon Valley model, this kind of growth required navigating regulation, infrastructure gaps, and unpredictable market conditions. So instead of relying on hype or rapid funding cycles, his expansion was built on persistence, adaptability, and long-term positioning. And that is why his influence operates differently. It is not driven by media attention. It is driven by impact. Because when you build infrastructure that connects millions of people, your importance is not based on visibility. It is based on necessity. And once that infrastructure becomes part of everyday life, it no longer needs to be seen to be understood. It simply works, quietly, consistently, and at a scale that shapes entire economies. The next name on this list mastered something even more powerful. Not just infrastructure, but attention itself. Because if you can control what people see, you don't just participate in the system, you shape it. And that brings us to number 1. Robert L. Johnson. This final name on the list represents something very different from the others. Because while most people in tech focus on software, infrastructure, or private equity, Robert L. Johnson built his empire in media and ownership at a time when very few Black entrepreneurs had access to that level of control. Through BET, he created one of the most influential media platforms in modern cultural history. But what makes his story important is not just what he built, it's how he understood ownership. He didn't just create content distribution. He created control over distribution itself. And that distinction is what separates him from many others in the industry. When BET was launched, it wasn't just another television network. It became a platform that gave visibility to content, stories, and voices that were largely ignored by mainstream media at the time. And in doing so, Johnson wasn't just participating in the media, he was shaping cultural access. Now, even though BET later became part of a larger corporate structure, the foundation of his success was already established. Ownership of a platform that controlled attention. And that connects directly to a broader pattern across everything. Because whether it's tech founders, private equity leaders, or infrastructure builders, the real power is never just in building something. It is in owning the system that decides how value flows. For Robert L. Johnson, that system was media distribution. For others in this list, it is software infrastructure, enterprise contracts, or investment ecosystems. But the principle remains the same. Control the platform and you control the outcomes. In traditional Silicon Valley culture, success is often measured through rapid scaling, public visibility, and constant personal branding. But Johnson's approach reflects something more strategic. Instead of chasing attention, he built a structure that generates attention. Instead of competing for visibility, he created visibility. And that difference is critical. Because once you control distribution, you no longer need to compete for relevance. You define it. This is also why his success continues to matter even today. Not because of constant media presence, but because of the foundational shift he created in media ownership and access. He proved that building wealth is not only about creating products or services, it is about controlling the channels through which culture, information, and opportunity flow. And that idea ties directly into the broader investment and scaling strategies seen across all the founders in this video. Whether it is enterprise software, private equity, telecommunications infrastructure, or media networks, the underlying principle is the same. Real power is not always visible. It is structural, and once that structure is in place, it continues to generate influence long after the spotlight moves elsewhere. That is the final layer of this list. Not just wealth, but ownership of systems that shape entire industries. And that is what makes Robert L. Johnson's story is the closing point of this video. Because he didn't just build a brand, he built a platform that changed who gets seen. And in doing so, he became part of a much larger pattern that defines every name in this video. Power that doesn't ask for attention. Power that creates it. At the end of the day, this isn't just about hidden billionaires. It's about a different philosophy of success. One that values control over clout, strategy over noise, and power over popularity. While the world watches who's trending, these founders are focused on something else entirely: building systems, owning infrastructure, and creating wealth that doesn't need validation. So the real question is, if you had the choice, would you rather be known or be powerful? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments.